Welcome to Resourced and Resourceful Leadership, a podcast for people who care about the world and their impact in it. I'm Dr. Christine Pettit, and I'm so happy that you're here listening in today. I have a treat for you. This episode is an interview with my friend from childhood, Emily Hanson. And in it, we explore our friendship over the years. And I was just really excited to interview her to talk about life on the farm, her many hobbies and jobs, thoughts on parenting, and how her parenting approach has evolved over time, identity, and so much more. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. It is a little different in the sense that it was done over the video chatting app, Marco Polo, so we sent messages back and forth to one another. I would ask questions. Overall, I think it worked out pretty well. It is the way that we communicate and have been communicating regularly for about 6.5 years. I really appreciate being able to stay in touch with Emily this way. So you'll hear that, you'll hear sounds. I think when she's talking about life on the farm, you actually hear some ducks clucking in the background, or maybe that's another part of it. You might hear some directions in there as I am driving during parts of it. Don't worry, I'm focused on the road. I'm not looking at the camera. And that's just kind of how we go about our life, like getting these conversations in where we can. So without further ado, here we go. Okay, so I just tested it out, and like I thought, I can download videos or download our Marco Polo videos. So if you're up for it, I would like to interview for the podcast this way, and then we can go back and forth. These are the things I was thinking we could talk about. Our friendship, how we became friends, and our friendship over the years, how we support one another as parents, just in general, like friendship pieces. I think that's an important part of living a well-rounded life and leadership broadly, leadership in our families, in our communities. And I do see you as a leader. I would like to talk to you about your dream of living on a farm and what that is like. Belly dancing, parenting, all of those things, and anything else that you would like to talk about. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So if you're amenable to it or amenable to it, let me know. And my first question to you would be, how did we get to know one another? And just early memories of me and our friendship. And then we'll go from there. I'll reflect back to you and we can go back and forth. So that's my thought. You can totally say no, but I would love to include you in this first year of podcasting. So all right, I will talk to you later. Bye.
I am both amenable and amiable and amendable to doing our interview via Marco Polo. And I will respond in a little bit. I'm going to think about early memories of Christine. I feel like, did I send you that poem about you? Don't remember if I did. I did enjoy working on it and thinking about it, so I will try to get back into that space. Anyway, I better get to work. I love you. Talk to you later.
Yay for doing the interview. Yes, you did send me the poem, and that made me think I want to look it up and print it out, actually. So I have it. It was very sweet. It doesn't have to be like a love fest of me, but just early memories of, yeah, how we met and whatever kind of comes up there. And then something to note is that I edit the podcast. It's very easy for me to take anything out. If you're like, why did I say that? I don't imagine. Also, this is not meant to be like a perfect thing. That's the whole point of my podcast. So perfection is not required, and imperfection and just humanness is welcome. But if there ever is something where you're like, I really don't want that in there, just let me know. I can take it out very easily. Okay, the other thing to consider is that I like to do a video component as well on, if you don't want a video component, we don't have to do it. I can totally do audio only. I realize that people have different sensibilities and feelings about that. So anyway, that's totally up to you if we do audio only or video. But just know, again, with the human piece, I would expect you to look human and not try to, not that you would look inhuman, but unhuman, alien, I don't know. But no performance is needed is basically what I'm saying. So anyway, yeah, let me know what you feel comfortable with and we'll go from there. All right. Love you. Bye.
That's funny. I was thinking, oh, I could wear a cat mask then. No, I will be human, I swear. As human as I can get, which is usually pretty close.
Okay, you asked me to talk about and remember how we met. And so I've been thinking on it. And I believe, and you can absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we met in 4th grade math class. It was one of those situations where you left your home classroom and were then gathered with other people who were of your same level. And I remember, and very vaguely, because that was a long time ago, but just our energies really clicking right away. We had a lot in common, and I think by the time we'd then started hanging out at recess, and then realized that we could walk to each other's homes, because back then children were unmanaged or less managed. That was it. That was deal made. We were friends. And from there, I just remember snow days, getting together and doing projects together and doing a lip sync performance together and having many mutual friends. And then moving forward and really enjoying a lot of the same things in high school. And again, we were very nicely matched. We had a lot of classes together, and you were the editor of the newspaper, and I liked to come and write for you. And then there was the Independent Women's Club with a membership of 4. And I just remember finding you so inspirational and just loving the energy when we were together. And then in college, we stayed in contact, and it wasn't as easy as it is now. But I remember writing back and forth and even going to visit you at least once before you went on your exchange and went to California and became a Californian like you are today. And after that, there was definitely a big pause. Not that we weren't friends by any means, but we just were very busy in our own lives and figuring ourselves out. You went on to get a doctorate, and I started my family a little bit earlier. And so we didn't see each other as often. I'd see you when you came home, and I always looked forward to that. And then I'm trying to remember, my kids were still fairly young, but not babies anymore. And you said, that's it. I want you to come see me. And I was like, oh. By then, a lot had happened in life, and I really wanted to, but I was also absolutely a little bit petrified of the idea of getting on a plane, which I hadn't done since having kids, and had done very limitedly since the 9/11 attacks. And you said, I bought your ticket. You're coming. And I did. And it was wonderful. And we had so much fun. And then I think it was really great for both of us. And we've just been able to maintain this friendship for, let's see, I think we were 9. I'll let you do the math, but I think it's around 35 years. And not to give too much away, might be even more than that. Again, math. I'm not as good at it anymore. But there's been just so many great aspects, I think, of our friendship. And I think that's how I met you, is way back in 4th grade math.
Emily, dear, thank you so much for those reflections. I am also remembering that we met in 4th grade, and I remembered that. I remember some people from your class would come over to mine, and probably people were going all different sorts of directions, but I didn't remember why. So math, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and I remember us hitting it off too, and then we got to be in 5th grade together as well. And so that's where I remember our friendship really solidifying and then growing from there. And snow days definitely are a highlight, and us making hot cocoa with whipped cream and sprinkles. And I also remember doing things like making poached eggs in your kitchen, which seemed like such a delicacy. But definitely no eggs were being poached in my kitchen growing up. And I remember also your little the playhouse in the back of your yard, and dreaming about me coming and living there when things were rough at home, as they often were. And you just being like a good and loyal friend. I remember your funny postcards that you would send to me in college. Yeah, with like sexual innuendos in terms of the imagery. You would create these postcards and send me letters. You were much better about that, which is, I think, in part where that like kind of gap, that life gap happened. But I appreciated always getting to see you when I would come home, and just really how our friendship has grown since I insisted you come to Long Beach and visit me about, that was coming on 11 years ago. And so I'm glad that you said yes and got on the plane, even though you might have just felt compelled to. And you've seen me through some major life transitions, and I appreciate always having you as a sounding board too, and someone who I know who will listen, who is very thoughtful. Again, the word loyal comes up, but like in a fierce, kind of protective way. And also so encouraging too. Not protective in the sense of like holding you back or anything, but just like, you know, my worth and value, and you advocate for it, and I hope that you feel the same way about me. But I feel like we do cheer each other on, And I think it's interesting because we definitely have a lot in common in terms of how we think about things, but also some difference. And I appreciate that, especially when it comes to like some of the things you share with me around parenting and just around taking care of myself and not expecting perfection, and that my needs are valid and valuable too in parenting. And those are things that I share with other people in different ways, and I think share with you, but we express them differently sometimes, and I like it. I dig it. I think it's really important. Anyway, I just love and value you as a friend so much, and I'm appreciative that you're doing this interview in this very experimental but reflective of how we are able to keep pretty regular communication through Marco Polo. So I think my next question for you is about where you live. I'd love for you to share a little bit about your farm and your dream of living on a farm and the reality of living on a farm.
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot about how we would have poached eggs. Like, I totally remember the hot chocolate and whipped cream and sprinkles, but I had totally forgotten about the poached egg. So the poached egg came because that's what my grandma Hanson, my dad's mom, the house that had the swimming pool we would sometimes go to, she would make those, and I just thought they were absolutely delicious. And I suspect, looking back, especially for the two of us, that it was because it was a high protein, high calorie snack and made it just fabulous. And so, yeah, that was fun to look back on. I had totally forgotten about that.
So growing up, I did not know that I wanted to be a farm or live on a farm. If anything, I felt like my parents' chores were slightly punishing, although delicious. I did think, because we had a really big garden and a hazelnut tree in the back and berries, I thought that I could just live in our backyard, essentially a small child's idea of off-grid. Surely it had everything I needed. And then as I got older, I just really wanted to be away from the small town environment where I felt very much lacking in the ideas of culture and art and diversity. So I did leave for school. Not far. I stayed in the same state, but went to a much more diverse area. And then had a wonderful time, and due to no fault of my own, ended up back living in my home area, and due to no plans of my own. And I ended up buying a house really young. I think I was 22. And that's the house where my husband and I started our relationship at. And that's also where I got back in touch with wanting to be this idea of more self-sufficient, of being able to depend on the food that's on my own land, or grow things to share with my community. And luckily, my now partner, husband, he grew up slightly differently, but by the time he was in middle school, he lived on a multi-generational piece of land where they did do a lot of canning and preserving and growing of foods. And one of his first jobs was taking care of the blueberry plants and selling all of the berries. And the first little house that I bought was on a postage stamp of property, because at that time I didn't want a yard to take care of. And the neighbors were very close. I used to joke that if I sneezed, my neighbor would probably say, "Bless you." And they were lovely. They were fine. But it was loud all the time. And I didn't love that. When my grandma and her health deteriorated, who lived back in my hometown, just 15 minutes away, 20 minutes away from where I bought this house in a bigger city, or city-ish area, my partner and I agreed to move in with her and help take care of her and her property. And we did that. And it was hard. And I'm still glad we did it. But then we started having kids and started building a family. So we moved back to that tiny little house that had never sold in the time that we had stepped away from it, though we tried. And eventually we recognized that we really wanted more space. We really love to grow our own plants, our own food, preserve it, eat it, enjoy it year round. And really a lot of the food evaluations and processing of things affected kind of how we ate. I think there was a year or two where we only ate things that had been grown within 100 miles of us or within Oregon. And it was a challenge because we did it year round. There's not a lot that grows in Oregon in the winter. Greens. And that's back when I still ate a lot of meat. And I don't do that now, so it'd be even harder. But we decided that what we really wanted to have was more property. And that we wanted to be able to grow our things. We knew we wanted a farm. So we worked towards that. Eventually we found this piece of property, and it was just the right time for us, and we were able to get on just under 10 acres. And since then, it's been both a dream and a challenge. And my husband always says, always an adventure, and it is. The dream parts are great, but when you live on a farm, you're a lot closer to the circle of life. We've had a lot of life and death on the farm of animals, and success and lack of success with different plants and trees, life and death of things we really wanted to succeed and didn't. And we are out further away from conveniences. We're out further away from resources when we had to evacuate or when we lost power in a huge storm. Our community is last to get everything back because our population is not as dense. But in exchange, it leads to a great feeling of community when things hit the fan. So I would say when we got to the farm, we had to decide, are we doing this to raise something commercially, or are we doing this to become more independent? And we've tried to find a balance for that. We raise chickens and sell eggs. We have for years grown garden stock, nursery stock, and sold that every year. We've sold our own produce and our own fruits and our own vegetables that we grow, but also always with the knowledge that if we needed to, we'd be able to depend on that a bit. Not the income from that, but the actual foods and the actual land. And it's definitely brought us a lot closer to our land. And when I think about when we had to evacuate, it wasn't the house and my things that I was very sad and scared to lose. It was my fruit trees and the berries and our garden. And of course, the larger animals that we hadn't been able to evacuate yet, I was very scared for them. But it was really the idea that our entire farm could be gone, our land, and these plants that take so long and their lifetimes are so different from ours. So there's definitely a lot of dream still involved. But now as we get older, there's also a lot of reckoning with that, in that we need to get it to a point where it's a lot easier to handle. And so more recently, in the last few years, fixing up the house, doing things that need to be done, but also figuring out how we want things more permanently, like exactly where we want the garden, and putting up permanent fencing and making it in a way that's not as physically laborious to care for. Because not only are we getting older, but all of our support people are getting older. Our friends and our parents who've always come out and done things with us for the joy of being on the farm. There was a time I thought that I wanted the farm to be more public, where I thought maybe it would be really cool if it was set up to the point that I could host preschool classes or any number of things out here. And I have hosted some small classes, but just the liability of that, the coordination, and the amount of care it would take to keep appearances how we want versus productivity how we want, there's just had to be a balance. And that has been hard to find as well. Will our kids continue on this farm? I don't know. In us living here, they unknowingly gave up living in a neighborhood where they could walk to their friends' houses like you and I enjoyed. That's not a possibility here. And they can't just quickly make plans and get there. So sometimes I think they're resentful of that. And sometimes I think that they recognize that also when we were on COVID lockdown, they had 10 acres to play in, and other kids had an apartment to stay in. And we were so lucky, and they are so lucky. And they've gotten to have all these experiences with different animals. They know a lot about plants that I don't think they've gotten to the point of realizing that they know and other people don't. So we'll see. I suspect that my son would be the one to want to stay here. But I could be wrong, and I don't know what their lives and their partners will want in the future if they choose to have one. So I try to not be emotional about that. I would love for this to be our legacy and for more of our generations to guard this land from being used for things that we don't value and appreciate. I'd love for them to continue to have the security of access to resources of food and plants and shelter, but I also know that this was our dream and not necessarily theirs. I'm going to stop there for a little bit.
I'm going to think about any follow-up questions I might have a little bit later in terms of farming time. But something I loved that you talked about too was like how it was your dream, not your kids, and like your hope for your kids and what you think about for them, but also I just appreciate that clarity that our kids are not us and our dreams are not the same as theirs, though cool when we share those things. But to me, that's a very leaderly quality in a parent in you. Hey, I just re-listened to the part about just you sharing about the dream and the realities of farming, and I had a few things that struck me. One thing that struck me was the balance of self-sufficiency, or that kind of idea, and community. Like some people might retreat to the woods because they want to take care of themselves and like their little family number one. And I don't see that in you, but there is like that kind of term of like self-sufficiency, right? But you so value community, and you get both in this experience. And I'm trying to think of like a good word or a good way to describe it, but it is like that ability to be on land, to steward that land, to cultivate it and benefit from it, like that connection. And also you talk about, yes, we're more spread out, so resources don't come here as readily and things like that, but there is this sense of community. Like, you build community even in this spread out place where people are doing their own thing in some ways. And, really seeing the interconnection. And I remember there were moments during I might be mixing them up, but like the fire and the ice storms where community really came together and did stuff that a lot of times you would expect maybe city infrastructure or institutions to do, but it's like, we're here and we're gonna figure this out. So I appreciate that, the way people come together and the way I know you think about how you can support people using the resources that you have, and I really appreciate that about you. So I guess just a reflection and something to think about if you want to add to that at all. And I know I already shared thinking about like your children and like what that means and what they're gonna want in the future, and I appreciate there's like this desire, and I know that you're holding it lightly, that you value who they are as humans beyond like one specific dream or pathway for them. So I just appreciate that about you. And yeah, I think about them like getting to have their friends over and play games in the fields, and I think about Oliver rocking out in the garage, drumming, and I don't know the half of it in terms of all their experiences. I also know my daughter Ellie has had the experience of getting to see the animals and brush the sheep and collect eggs, and we always just appreciate the experience of being on your farm as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. I think it's pretty cool. We do live in a place where we can walk to horses, so that's neat. Ellie loves animals, and just she gets a sense of a little taste of farm life, so I appreciate that. What else? I mean, there's so much to talk about. I'm like, okay, I can really only ask you a couple more questions because already I think we're at about 29 minutes, and so we'll probably make it about an hour. 45 minutes to an hour is a good thing. So I'm not saying that to say anything. Your answers are perfect, so talk as much as you want, but I was like, okay, probably just a few more questions. I guess one thing I wanted to highlight about the work that you do on the farm is that this is not your full-time job. You have a full-time job. Tony has a full-time job, or close to it, I believe. And you're parenting and taking your kids all the places, though good thing that Angelina can drive now. The good and the scary part about being a parent. But you're doing all the things and tending to the farm and teaching belly dancing classes, like connecting with, I think, that passion that you have for dancing and that creative outlet of creating a class, doing choreography, teaching, all of that creativity that you have too, and also working at the local restaurants that your friend owns and supporting her with that. So you're doing a lot. And I was just like, oh my gosh, just struck. And you've always been a really hard worker. And I know that's how you were able to buy a house at 22, is whatever opportunity is aligned for you to be able to do that. But you were a manager, I believe, at Elmer's at that point. Maybe you had moved on to another job. I haven't tracked your whole history, but you had worked really hard to, or just worked a lot too. I just want to say worked a lot. And I think that's been a theme. I'm not like saying, ooh, yay, you worked so hard, like glorifying overwork, but just to say like these things that you've been able to create in your life, it's been through like this focus and your orientation toward work, for better or worse, as an eldest daughter, carrying the weight of responsibility, all of that stuff. So anyway, just reflecting on that. What questions do I have for you? I don't know. Anything resonate there in terms of that like balance between self-sufficiency and community, or the thread connected to parenting or working? All the things. And yeah, just how you think about your life, how it fits together. What does leadership look like for you in your own life right now? Okay, that was probably a lot, so just pick anything you want to respond to, or you can take us in another direction if you want. I love you. I hope you're having a good week.
Okay, the lighting's not great, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the balance of farm life and the rest of life, because I'm feeling it very much right now. I just finished teaching my dance class tonight, which I very much enjoy, and it manages to be twofold. It earns me a little bit of extra income, and it also keeps me active and engaged in dancing, which I really love. But the thing with living on a farm and it not being your only job is that nothing ever feels like it gets your full attention. There's a constant pull between my work, that is the work that pays my bills and allows for my family to live a more financially secure life than my husband or I did growing up. And then there's the stuff I would rather do, which is to be doing things on the farm. But we can't do anything on the farm if we don't have the money from our regular jobs, and we can't have health insurance, or we just could not have the same financial stability and live the same with the same level of security, and without my children constantly being told that we couldn't do something, which I think they probably feel like they hear no a lot, but they have a very different level of security and lifestyle than either my husband or I did. I would love to someday not have to work another job, but in this economy, and the reality is that I would not feel comfortable if the farm was only for commercial use. I don't feel like it would be respectful to my community or the land if I had to push it in that direction even harder. And honestly, I don't know that it would be sustainable for either of our bodies. It's a lot of hard work, and there are many times I am grateful that I have a job that is indoors, that I have a job where I can sit down or stand as I wish, that I'm not having to use my body as thoroughly and hard and wear it out in the way that the farm work sometimes we do does. So it is a really hard balance.
because everything takes time. And so sometimes the farm takes away from the home. Sometimes it takes away from being able to even leave. That's something we have to consider probably a lot more than more urban households is we have to pay someone to come and stay on the farm and do the at least twice a day chores that are required of it. And that is what we do anytime we are going to be gone for more than a day. And it's an extra level of expense for us to be gone. And it is also a extra level of planning and finding someone who's able to do it. So yeah, there's a lot to balance in doing both of it. I don't want to give up the farm, but I'm also not ready to give up the financial security of having a regular, which now fully remote job. It is much easier now that I'm fully remote in many ways. We live far enough out that not having to drive and use our time to get to the job, to not have to use the gasoline, and that we can just be here, especially during times like right now where we have a pretty high fire danger and a lot of anxiety about the potential for having to evacuate again like we did in 2020. So I feel like right now we're at a good balance. My other jobs are really more just for expenses that I may wish to support. Most recently, things like making donations to causes that are important to me and not feeling like it's going to affect my bottom line for my household. I really like being able to do that. Or sometimes it helps with Christmas presents or extra little things. Or more recently, I was able to pay for all of our plane tickets just using my side jobs and not feeling that extra pinch. But the trade-off is that often I'm exhausted by the end of the day. On Tuesdays, I work more than 12 hours between both jobs. And even though the dance class is only an hour, I do put more into that in the planning and choreography and all the things that I do that are outside of that class time. It's a trade-off and a balance. I'm not really ready to give any of it up yet, even though sometimes I do feel very weary of all of it. In running our farm, I feel like it is a pleasure and a responsibility because I feel like we are stewards of this land and space, and it's always been really important to me that we treat it well. We live very near a creek, even though our current property line doesn't go all the way to the creek side. We're very mindful of what we put into the land and what we take out of the land, how we use it, and also how we use what we get from it. And I feel like that is often a common sentiment across many groups that live out in this area. I am proud to say that there's a lot of women farmers in this community, or at least women that I consider the leaders of their farm, some of which I know personally and some of which I just see through social media, and I appreciate their leadership and care for the land as well, and that often I see donations for the community from all different directions. And I do feel like owning land is an obligation both to the land itself and the community around it.
I love what you shared. Two things came up for me. One is you were talking about the farm and the balance. I think a lot of creatives feel that way. I see your work with the farm as a creative outlet as well. And I think a lot of people who are creative or have these projects feel like that your farm is more than a project, but I hope you know what I mean. Feel that pull of like sustainability and the dream, or, you know, the other thing that kind of lights you up and is also a lot of hard work. So I could relate to you on that. I think where I have been experiencing that, I'm grateful that I have been able to create a business for myself that I get to, you know, direct my work and express. But where I've felt that kind of tension is the work that I do for others that's like client driven, and then what I am actually like creating, like this podcast. And yeah, there's always more that could be done, but doing it anyway, I think that's important. But also like being aware of, yeah, your capacity, how it wears on your body or your brain, and not feeling like it is enough. So anyway, that was interesting. I appreciate also your reflections on leadership and stewardship of the land. And the other thing that came up to me as a question is, you talk a lot about your class background and like economic realities too, and I think you look at things a lot through that like economic and class lens and your experience growing up and even now, and like the experience of your children. And I'm curious, what other parts of your identity are important to you? What parts of your identity do you carry throughout the world, or do you like really relate to?
I feel like my identity is something very difficult to talk about and very convoluted. I do feel like my identity as a woman plays a big role in my perception of my community and the things in it, and definitely as someone, like you said, who has experienced different levels of class and income. I also feel as though the fact that I was able to get a higher level of education than my parents and most of my grandparents also has contributed to my perception of myself and my identity. And maybe that's enough. I definitely feel very strongly about my identity as a mom, and my identity as a community member, a rural community member. Even though I do love visiting a city, I can't picture myself as being part of a community in one, other than with my beautiful friend you and the fancies. It's very hard for me to conceptualize living in a city again. So yeah, those I guess are some good aspects of how I identify myself. I identify as a creative person, even though, like you said, the farm, I feel like, is part of my creativity, and dancing, and I still love to write, and I like to knit. I think it's a funny juxtaposition of like my interests, which I think some people could look at me and think I'm very trad wifey in my hobbies and in my lifestyle out here, but then that would directly conflict so much with my political identity and my perception of kind of how those things are perceived publicly. I don't know. I guess I don't think there's anything wrong with someone wanting to play that traditional gender role, but I don't feel like that describes me despite all my weird hobbies.
Oh my gosh, I've never thought of you as trad wifey. That's hilarious. But you do have some hobbies that you enjoy, which I think I associate it more. There was this book that I read, and I had some of my sociology students read, called Radical Homemakers. And I would put you more in that tradition, I guess, even though you're not a homemaker either. You work, but you appreciate having a connection to your food, the land, making things, like the tangible, and I love that. And I don't know if this is like the complicated part of your identity that you don't want to share about, but I think for me, what's interesting, and you could share whatever you want, but for me, growing up in the town that we did, I read everyone as white, even people with different ethnic backgrounds, unless they were obviously more from an immigrant or a clearly different cultural kind of way of being. In particular, immigrants
at the light,
what I thought were just folks from Mexico, but were probably from a lot of different countries. And then also our kind of Russian community that was more Orthodox, or I think it's Russian Orthodox religion, but I might be ignorant around that. And so again, we don't have to put any of this in, but I think part of your identity, I believe, has been connected to like Mexican culture, and even like learning Spanish and living in Mexico, or doing the exchange in Mexico and things like that. So anyway, curious if you want to share anything about that, but don't feel compelled, and maybe that's like part of what feels complicated. But yeah, definitely I relate in terms of being a woman. For me, growing up a girl had a big impact on the way that I saw the world and how I experienced growing up a girl. And my education certainly does. The different class positions of my mom and dad, and then like even the changing class position of my family as I grew up, but being very aware that we were like not buying the name brand clothes, and definitely knowing that I wasn't upper class, and that class, I think, was associated with being popular in our school when we grew up, being upper class. And I'm sure not everyone who was, and I mean, we did end up having a prom queen from not an upper class background, but to me, popularity had to do a lot with class presentation, even if it wasn't always the reality. I was sharing with someone recently that I identified as a feminist from a young age when it didn't make sense, like in high school, and pro-choice. So it's interesting how like our different identities kind of get shaped. Identity as a mother, a friend, I like as a community member. That's really interesting. What you shared is totally fine. You don't need to share more, but it's just something I was kind of curious about. Kind of the racial, ethnic part of your identity. And then what else? I think maybe I'll send you something. I was thinking about like the different phases of parenting and the different ways that we might show up at different phases, and how leadership may look different at different phases of parenting. And so I was thinking about sharing with you the 8 C's of self-leadership, and seeing like maybe which ones are important to you, like in your parenting, or maybe how you think of leadership more broadly as well. I don't want to reduce your leadership to mamahood, but I feel like that's one area that we connect around a lot in terms of just different phases of different phases of being a parent and supporting each other through the hard phases of that and celebrating some of the fun stuff. Okay, a little interjection from me as I'm editing. The prom queen I joke about earlier was Emily. Not joke about, but reference in a lighthearted way. And then the 8 C's of self-leadership. We had a text exchange about them, and I sent her the 8 C's of self-leadership. I've talked about them on other podcasts, but just to refresh here, they are calm, clarity, curiosity, compassion, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. And I will share more about that now. Hey, they are the 8 C's of self-leadership, and I just thought you could apply them to parenting since a lot of our conversations are about that, but we also talk about work and friendships and everything. So yeah, any reflections you have about them. The way I like to think about them is it's part of a framework, internal family systems, where some of the podcasts I've done about working with different parts of ourselves, the ideas that we have this inner, what I like to call inner wisdom, but this self that embodies these qualities of self-leadership. And so when I think maybe a different part of me is trying to run the show, like my fears or angst about something or whatever, I try to think about making a decision from a place of self-leadership. Or if I'm in a difficult situation, maybe a hard conversation or something like that, I think about pulling in 1 or 2. Which of these do I want to practice or keep in mind? So I was thinking about that in terms of in parenting, like the different seasons of parenting. I thought that might be interesting since you are further along in your parenting journey than I am. Like how what you need to practice may have changed over the years or what's present for you right now.
I would say that my approach and my, I guess, style of leadership, as you've put it, definitely has changed as my children have gotten older. As they were very young, I felt like I used a lot more, what happened here? Creativity, sorry. I used a lot more creativity in the interactions we had and what we did, and like using it as reasoning for a variety of things and inspiration. And now I would say, and probably then as well, I really try to focus on clarity with them. I want to give them very clear expectations, as well as clear communication about how I feel and how I interpret a lot of the things happening around us. And also, I feel like clarity leads and aligns a lot with accuracy. For example, in talking about our bodies and talking about boundaries and talking about sexuality. So I would say we do a lot of clarity in this house and clarifying. And I'm sure there's other ones. I regularly have to encourage myself to be courageous. I definitely, as the kids have gotten older, have found it to be more challenging to address things rather than less. I've never questioned their ability to process things or their intelligence. But now I find myself questioning my own and often wondering, like, is this really how I feel about this subject? Is this really current knowledge and the best approach? So I feel like I turn to you a lot for that, for encouragement and maybe like fact checking and keeping myself true and centered and not getting wrapped up and distracted by my own experiences or past that may or may not really be pertinent to the subject at hand. So there's that answer. As far as my identity, yes, you're right. I am avoiding talking about my cultural identity because it is complicated, or I feel like it is complicated to explain. It's certainly been complicated to feel as I've gotten older. When I was younger, I got a lot of questions about myself and my mom and my sister and what are we? And I grew up hearing a lot about our Mexican ancestry and hearing about that side of the family that my mom valued and actually had information on and learned from her grandmother. And as I grew up and as I've gotten older, I feel like perhaps I'm not in as public as much, or maybe people just don't ask as often, but I certainly don't get asked what I am nearly as often. And my children do not have that same experience. And then I start questioning myself. Am I trying to appropriate a culture that isn't mine, or that I shouldn't, feel as or express as strongly as I have felt in the past? They certainly question me about it. So I feel like that identity is really hard to pin down and describe. When I was younger, I would have very clearly stated that I'm a Mexican American Latino woman. And now I do still feel those things, but I guess I'm more hesitant to express them because I've been questioned. And so that is a part of my identity that I have a hard time describing now. So yes, you're accurate. That is exactly what I was avoiding and feeling like I don't really know how to answer anymore. So I do agree with you. A lot of the popularity in our high school was more based on class, but I was very acutely aware of some of the different cultures and influences in our community and lack of support for them, because that is what my mom's work focused on. And definitely we were acutely aware of the fact that, yes, we had our own struggles, but there were people who certainly struggled a lot more than us. And how could we help them? How could we make it better? How could we improve our community and create resources in order to assist them? All right, I love you. Let me know if that needs to be redone. It did not feel like a lot of clarity.
Hey, love. I'm just working on this week's podcast episode. You're going to be next week. And thank you. I think that was perfectly clear, because identity is often very complicated. And it is part of your identity and background. So you're not appropriating it. I think over the years, people have learned that it's it's uncouth to ask, where are you from? And there's more cultural awareness. Ellie is here and I haven't seen her all day, so I'm gonna go say hi. But I love you and I will share more I was starting to say identity is complicated for many people, so you're not alone in that. And yes, I think where are you from used to be a commonly accepted question for interrogating people who, I mean, interrogating in a light way, but also not a light way. Like people's identity, background, if there was a perceived difference. So there's that. I think you may also be white passing based on your ethnic background. And people might not question as well, especially in the City of Love, See No Color, which I think was a beautiful expression in its idea. I don't know if you remember what I'm referencing to, but I remember that being kind of the theme, is this what sociologists would call colorblind racism, but this like, we don't see color. And it's meant to be this kind of like liberal thing, but it's also not recognizing and acknowledging difference and like celebrating that. It's just, no, we don't see it. Everybody blends in. We treat everyone the same. And again, the sentiment I think is beautiful, but the realities and impacts of that, not so much. So I just think about like where I'm from, where you're from, where you are, and how that all comes into play with identity. But I appreciate you sharing and letting me prod you a little bit on that. And I appreciated your reflections. Yeah, I think creativity, like parenting, really is an act of creativity if you don't want to lose your shit. And even when you are losing your shit, like to try to be creative in that, and both like in helping your kids like experience the world, but also just in the ways we come up with as parents to manage and support and try to be playful and all of that in the midst of stress and change and anxieties. And then clarity, I love that in terms, like you went in a different direction than I was thinking, but I really appreciate that thought about like giving clear information and like checking your own kind of assumptions or knowledge and supporting your children in that way too, to have accurate information, to challenge assumptions. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And thinking about as your kids grow up, and even just the conversation we're having about exploring spirituality or connections to religion and our just worldviews and how we move through the world, like the values that you have, that quest for providing clear information in a way to be open for conversations. I really appreciate that. So thank you for reflecting with me on the 8 C's of self-leadership and like how that has changed through your parenting journey. I think creativity can be really useful probably at the phase of parenting that you're at right now too. In the teenage years and high school years. And it seems like a time when maybe the traditional ways of connecting or relating the foundation for that shifts quite a bit. So being creative about our approach to connecting with our kiddos and all of that. And then also probably expanding your creativity, though you don't have a problem with that, beyond child rearing. But I know for a lot of parents, for a big part of their child rearing years, it's very focused on the kids. You are very focused on your children as well, but I think you have these outside friendships and hobbies and work and things that will also nourish you as your children get older, are more independent, all of that good stuff. So anyway, I love you. I so value you as a friend. I'm just so grateful for you. I'm grateful that you've introduced me to this way of video chatting and that we've been keeping it up for over 6 years, 6.5 years almost, through that visit, that when you came to visit me and the COVID shutdowns began and we didn't see each other in person for a while. Yeah, I appreciate having this way of communicating with you, and just, I really value our friendship. So thank you so much. I love you dearly. And I appreciate you doing this podcast experiment with me. If there's anything else that you want to share, or any other reflections you have, please share them.
I do have one more thing to say. I want to thank you for letting me be a part of this podcast and this adventure that you have gone on, and say that I'm proud of you for sticking with it, because it was no small feat. I know it was a very large commitment of time and energy, and you have really stuck to it and used a lot of creative resources to express what you wanted to put out there. And also, thank you, as usual, for just your influence on my life. I don't think I would be the same me if it wasn't for you. After over 30 years of friendship, I would not be the same woman. I would not be the same mom. I would not be the same community member or citizen of this earth without having had your influence in so many ways. So I love you, and I'm proud of you, and I'll look forward to our next chat.
Thanks again to Emily for the interview and conversation, and we've already exchanged many Marco Polos since we wrapped the interview. And thank you for listening in today. If you want to hear more of the Resourced and Resourceful Leadership podcast, please follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. This is going to be especially important now to get notified when I release podcasts. Next week will be my last weekly podcast in this year-long experiment. So please do follow or subscribe so you'll get those notifications. And to support the show, go back, look at your favorite episode, send that to a friend who you think would enjoy it. Please consider leaving a 5-star review and share the show, like I said, with a few people who you think would appreciate it. And please check out the link to SpeakPipe in the show notes. I'd love it if you left me a message about what stood out to you from this interview or topics you'd like me to cover in the future. Thanks again, and take good care.